How are you guys doing? This is Ryan. Welcome back to the channel. In this week's video, I want to talk about, why Bitcoin Cash is going parabolic, or in the process of it. It just broke out of its falling wedge of the last 7.5 years. But I really want to talk about why Bitcoin Cash is not only going parabolic, but is going to likely win. And there's some really interesting things here to understand. So why is Bitcoin Cash likely to win and fulfill the mission of peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world, freeing humanity of economic tyranny? So now that was the mission, and let's jump into it. So there's some very interesting things about crypto, right? You have Bitcoin, which it has over 60% of total market dominance, and that's a massive market advantage. And then you have everyone else, let's say 60 to 65%. Then you have like the other 35 to 40% doing everything else. So let's break those out. Bitcoin has the branding. Bitcoin is synonymous with crypto, with blockchain. It has extremely strong branding. It had a huge first mover advantage, and it is widely recognized and well branded. And beyond that, it has very little else. It has a higher hash rate, which is very important. But that is really it. It is an ossified chain, and it doesn't have a long-term sustainable model because the chain cannot sustain transactions. While it has a high price and high hash rate, it has empty blocks. And as the inflation goes away in Bitcoin, it no longer has a sustainable model to incentivize miners to process transactions and get a fee from that. That's a big problem, and also its lack of tech innovation will cause its branding to dwindle, okay? And then you have everyone else, the other 35%, which is all these laboratories of innovation for cryptography to further innovate for financial tooling and so on. So financial tooling are very broad. There's a lot of laboratories of innovation going on. So where is Bitcoin Cash in that? So those are two very important things if you look at going in the market. And what Bitcoin Cash has unique to it is that it has Bitcoin, not only in the name, but in the Genesis block, in the cryptographic proof of the chain. And that is a very critical thing, I believe, to have in terms of the trust, the branding, the longevity of the success of the chain. And then it has or is building everything else. And that's why when you look at other coins, they're very interesting. You should pay attention to them. And in the early days, this is where early Bitcoin maximalism came from, was that Bitcoin is likely to win because it is at that time over 90 some odd percent of total market dominance. And then it'll watch the innovations of the market and it'll gobble it up and make these other projects obsolete. That's the way a lot of things work in the world, right? If there's let's say Instagram was losing a lot of market share to Snapchat, so they created stories and grabbed a lot of that market share back and stayed a dominant, bigger company, right? And kept a bigger market dominance. And the companies like Meta must pay attention to the market and innovate useful things for their users to use. This is how markets work. And while Bitcoin is blind to this, and I've talked about it before, for very, well unintended reasons, it is likely to not be the winner in the long run. And then there's everyone else. So, and to touch a little bit more on that, Bitcoin Cash over the last 3 years has made incredible innovations. It has created something called ABLA, which was the biggest reason why Bitcoin was ultimately ossified and destroyed from a technical standpoint and a community standpoint. There was like a super majority that wanted to increase the block size and it didn't happen. It is an extremely centralized chain where very few people decide what happens. When you have a super majority of consensus and you still cannot make progress. Now, with that said, two things. Transactions and throughput are critical for longevity of chains. And you might get a BSV comment on this. well, Bitcoin SV is a fork of really BCH, but it can mine multi gigas, whatever gigachads, whatever they're doing, and and nobody cares. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, it's because it's you need to have throughput on your chain, but you also need people to have. In my opinion, they are just building mud pies, right? Mud pies is an economic concept where users' value of something is subjective, right? And while they're doing these massive blocks, we know this technology can scale, and it is important to work on, and Abla solves that, but they're not doing anything to get any interest in the chain now. That's why the coin is now out of the top 100 coins. So my BSV friends that watch these videos, you guys are building mud pies. Try to have a community that works with other communities, is on exchanges, doesn't sue everyone, doesn't create ways for people to confiscate your keys and use court orders, just a whole bunch of nonsense. And ultimately they're building mud pies, they're building technology that has very little value to people. They're just proving in Bitcoin Cash's stance that we can, of course, continue to scale, way beyond the 32 megabyte blocks and the Abla adjustable block size upgrades that will happen in the future. So they are doing legwork that we need to do and will be doing in the future. So that's that. And then if you look at the Cash tokens upgrade, which was a huge innovation that allowed smart contracting to take place via UTXO scripting, which is simply, I know that sounds, if you're newer to crypto, it is how Bitcoin operates. And when Ethereum, who was originally, Vitalik was a Bitcoiner, wanted to create smart contracting on Bitcoin, he would have likely have done something like what Bitcoin Cash is doing now, but he went and built something called EVM, Ethereum's virtual machine, which is highly congested. Every time you make a smart contract, it updates the whole global state of the network, and it becomes very difficult to use. So it's where Bitcoin Cash is like a register. It spits out contracts, each transaction, or the tokens take place on the UTXO transactions. So, it's just better innovation too. So sometimes we can just steal what other people are doing, or we can look at it and even make it better, which is a huge advantage. So this is why it's hard to ever get away from Bitcoin Cash. Even if you look at something like Zano, which is an interesting project that a lot of people in the BCH space do pay attention to, because it tries to help with peer-to-peer electronic cash and privacy. But with the VM limits upgrade, you can create something like Zano as a token of BCH. And this is where it all starts to play out. It's like, why did these other chains really exist? Well, they exist to strengthen Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is really actually Bitcoin Cash, because Bitcoin Cash is what the white paper reads, and in the long run has a actual long-term sustainable model. So if you hear my excitement and you've been following Bitcoin Cash for a while, it's, I do pay attention to the market. Something else to point out, the developers within BCH ecosystem have done an incredible job, building, advanced oracles to, have market making activity. You can create a loan within seconds with the oracles that have been created within the BCH ecosystem. Something like that Chainlink does. It links data and information, together very quickly. I think a lot of Chainlink developers will ultimately become Bitcoin Cash developers. And you name the coin, it all could have been built on Bitcoin, and it actually is all being built on Bitcoin. It is currently under the name Bitcoin Cash, and in the long run, 10, 15, 20 years, as this thesis predictably plays out, you will see this activity happen. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No, but you can see the gradualism. You can see BCH gaining in price, gaining in market cap, and it's it hasn't been an easy road. Building peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world, certainly came with strong contention. That's why the civil war with the big blockers and small blockers within Bitcoin that created these separate chains happened. And then right after that, Bitcoin Cash suffered attacks and other chain splits. Over the last 3-4 years, the community has stayed on vision and just innovated. It is just innovated. So hopefully that brings more context as to like, I don't want to say other coins are a waste of time, because they aren't a waste of time. They are useful for the innovations that smart people can build on, that are going to happen. But the branding and the genesis block and the longevity, from a cultural perspective, will prove to be predominant. And I think the overall thesis, when people realize, oh my God, this was supposed to be what Bitcoin is, oh my God, it actually is what Bitcoin is, it will be the ultimate, market takeover from a majority standpoint, or and the market will just fall into Bitcoin Cash. And these things are very hard to see if you're new. They're very hard to see if you're so invested and blinded. But these are just predictable things that are going to happen, in my opinion, not financial advice. This is just how I look at the markets. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for future content, and I'll see you in my next one.